The formula is really simple. Take Tata Motors' smallest car, the Tiago, on one hand, take their expertise in building electric cars in the other hand, put them both together, and this is what you get. This is the Tata Tiago EV, and it is significant because it is affordable. The Tiago EV prices start at rupees 8.5 lakhs ex-showroom, and it is the first electric car to break under the rupees 10 lakh barrier in India. It is the most affordable electric car in India, and that opens it up to a whole new audience. Welcome to Evo India and welcome to our first drive review of this car. We're going to be telling you everything you need to know about it. Styling, interiors, what it's like to drive, what the real world range is. So stick around. Before we go ahead, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Evo India channel and leave a comment down below. Would you like the Tiago EV in your garage? Okay, first things first, let's talk about the styling of the Tiago EV and how it's different from a standard Tiago. First things first, you've got this blue line which runs across the width of the car. That's a defining feature on Tata's electric cars. The Tiago gets it too. Now, there's no grille because this doesn't need as much cooling as an ICE car. So you've got this blacked out panel over here. It's got a glossy finish with the EV symbol over here. Below that, you've got changes to the bumper. The tri-arrow design that Tata uses so liberally across its cars, it's neatly integrated into the bumper down below. I actually like how the Tiago EV looks. It looks very similar to the regular Tiago, but still distinct in its own way. Now, when you come around to the side, you've got 14-inch wheels. There's a different wheel design over here and the wheels are blacked out, and I think that looks really cool. You've also got the EV badge on the flank, and the wheelbase, it is 2400 mm. It's exactly the same as the regular Tiago. And when you come around to the rear, just like the front, not too much is different here. It looks very familiar. It looks just like the Tiago, but you've got Tiago EV badging on the back. Something else that is new is this paint. You've got a couple of exclusive paint colors for the Tiago EV, and I think this light blue looks really good. Okay, let's quickly run through the interiors and what the changes here are as well. Just like the outside, you've got blue accents on the interiors as well, around the air vents. They look pretty cool. In front of me, I've got a digital instrument cluster. It's fully digital and it's not the easiest to read at first, but once you get used to it, you realize where things are laid out and it becomes a lot easier. I found it a little tricky in the morning, but now I'm okay with it. On the left hand side, you've got a dial for your drive and your regen. On the right hand side, you've got an indicator for your battery charge, and you've got all sorts of information in here. You've got your range, you've got your efficiency, the trip meter, your odometer, speedo, all sorts of stuff. The steering wheel, not too much has changed there. On the center console, you've got this touchscreen infotainment system. It gets wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. The touch is not as sensitive as I would have liked, but otherwise, no real complaints there. You've got a rotary gear selector, that is new. And with this, you can select reverse, neutral, drive, or you can change the drive mode into sport. That is done through this gear selector as well. On the dashboard, you've also got your buttons for your regen settings. So this car has 4 regen settings, and these 2 buttons here on the dash are what allow you to control that. You've got automatic AC, that's across the range, and you've also got connected car features as standard across the range. So the Tiago EV, it's not just a bone bare basic spec car. This is a small car, but Tata Motors has tried to fill in a fair bit of kit. So you've got leatherette seats, you've got cruise control, you've got auto headlamps, you've got auto wipers, you've also got a TPMS system, and that makes this car much easier to live with. So if you're somebody who's using the Tiago EV as a second car in your garage and you're used to bigger cars, the Tiago EV suddenly doesn't feel like a compromise anymore. These small features, they really uplift the driving experience a fair bit. Okay, the back seat of the Tata Tiago EV. There's honestly not too much space here. You've got about an inch of knee room. I'm 5'10", driver's seat is in my position, and yeah, about an inch of knee room, not too much. Headroom is generous though, there's a fair bit of headroom, fairly comfortable over here. There's no sunroof though, and that's just something you're gonna have to live with. It's the nature of cars in this class. What I like is that the seat is mounted fairly high up, so I can tuck my feet underneath this seat. That makes me feel like I can stretch out a little bit more. But the space in here is cramped. Even for 3 people, it will be cramped. It's best for 2 people and best for shorter people. Okay, before we get to the driving, one last thing, let's talk about the boot space. The Tiago EV gets an electrically operated boot. So you press that button, this opens up, and you've got 240 liters of storage. Something that's interesting to note, underneath the boot floor, there is no spare wheel. You do get a small crevice which you can store additional things in, but there is no spare. Instead, you get a puncture repair kit. Now, in terms of the amount of stuff you can fit in here, first you've got this. This is the bag which carries the charger. You're probably going to carry this everywhere you go. That goes in the corner there. And this is Rohit's camera bag. And let's just see how much space this takes up over here. So you can probably fit 2 of these. Or you can fit 1 large suitcase and a small duffel bag alongside it. It's enough room for just being practical, but it's not a very large boot. Okay, first things first, there are 2 possible battery configurations you can get your Tiago EV with. One is 19.2 kilowatt hours, second is 24 kilowatt hours. The latter, that is the long range variant, and that is what we're driving today. Now, a 24 kilowatt hour battery pack, that is slightly smaller than the battery pack in the Tigor EV. So these are not identical, the Tigor EV and the Tiago EV, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, the Tiago EV is a little smaller. It does not have that boot that sticks out like the Tigor EV. So in terms of packaging, they've had to package it a little differently. You've got to keep a little bit of room in the rear. There has to be enough space for a crush zone before the battery starts, just to protect the battery in case of an accident. And that's one of the reasons why there's a smaller battery pack. But more critically, I think the reason there's a smaller battery pack is the price. And part of that aggressive pricing is thanks to the fact that it has a slightly smaller battery. The motor, that is not identical to the Tigor EVs as well. First of all, let's talk outputs. You've got 74 bhp and 114 Nm of torque. But the way it delivers its torque, the way the reducer works, the 1-speed transmission as we call it, the way that works, that is a little different compared to the Tigor EV. So it's not like the ICE cars where you've got one common drivetrain between the 2 cars and it's shared. Here, the Tiago EV has its own heart. The electrical platform, the battery and the motor, they are their own thing when compared to the Tigor EV. They are different, and that means it drives a little differently. Right, now in terms of the way it drives, let's first talk performance. This being an electric car, it does genuinely have sprightly performance. Off the line, it does feel quick, it does feel responsive. You've got all of that torque right from the get-go, so it does feel reasonably quick. Tata Motors claims a 0 to 60 time in 5.7 seconds. Now, I honestly don't know if that's a very good time or a bad time, because we generally don't test cars up to 60 kilometers an hour. We test them up to 100 kilometers an hour. But in terms of the way it feels, it does feel quick. So you step on it, and it does pick up speed enthusiastically. Now, it's not that typical EV neck snapping acceleration. It doesn't have the power for that. But what it does have is a bit of a spark to it, a bit of sprightliness to it, a bit of energy to it. And that makes it feel nice and enthusiastic on the road. The connection between the throttle pedal and the drivetrain also feels very direct. It doesn't feel like there's too much of a lag. It doesn't feel like you're giving an input and then the car is responding. It feels crisp, it feels direct. The Tiago EV gets drive mode. So you've got your regular D, which is your city mode, but you can also switch it into sport. So you do that, it gets into S, and now performance is just a little bit more enthusiastic. The initial travel of throttle is a lot more sensitive, so it feels a lot quicker when you just get off the line. There's a little bit of torque steer, just a hint of it, but it certainly feels a lot more enthusiastic. Sport mode, it will drain your range faster. So the second I switch into sport mode, my range indicator goes down a couple of kilometers, and that's because sport will drain more battery. But it is more enthusiastic, and if you're not worried about range and you want to have a little bit of fun, sport mode is the place to be. It genuinely does feel quick. Back to drive mode for now though, because I want to save a little bit of range. We've got a whole shoot to finish. And the next thing that I need to talk about is the range, the real world range of the Tiago EV. Now, claimed range for this long range variant is 315 kilometers. That's on the ARAI cycle, and that is nowhere close, promise you, nowhere close to real world representative. I don't understand why companies market it, because you really can't hit that range number ever. This morning, when we started up the car, it showed 98% on the dash, and the range readout was at around 220 kilometers. The second I put the air conditioning on, that dropped to 204 kilometers. So my guess is around 200 kilometers easily on one charge. And then depending on your driving, depending on how much energy you're regenerating, depending on the conditions you're driving in, you can probably stretch it another 20 kilometers or so. So realistically, I would say expect between 200 and 220 kilometers of range. Now, is that good? Is that bad? That depends on what your use case is, isn't it? To somebody who's using it just in the city, I think that's more than adequate. You can get by a couple of days without charging your car. If you're planning to head out on long trips, you will have to plan. But I've driven an EV long distance in the country, and honestly, it's less intimidating than you think. You just have to plan ahead. You have to make sure you know where your chargers are. You have to anticipate what sort of usage your car is going to have. So if you've got a cart or a climb in front, anticipate for that. Anticipate that your range will drop quicker. If you've got a downhill section, you can assume that your range will go up slightly. So once you get used to driving your EV a little bit, you will start understanding it, and then driving long distance isn't too hard. Now, main highways, maybe Bombay, Pune, Goa, they are fairly electrified. So driving a Tiago EV, yes, you may have to stop more than once to charge up, but you will definitely make it. So 200 kilometers of range, I think, is more than adequate for a city runabout, which is what this aims to be. But should you want it as your only car to drive long distances, then, well, you've got to plan. That's all I'd have to say. I'm not going to not recommend this car to you because of that, but you will have to plan, and plan well. Now, something else that's worth talking about is the Regen modes. This is not something that the original Nexon got, but it is something that the Nexon EV Max got. And the Tiago EV does get it, despite sitting a whole segment below that car. And that just goes to show how Tata Motors is learning as it grows. So it's learnt Regen modes, it's activated it in the Nexon, and now the Tiago gets it too straight off the bat. So what do? You've got two buttons on the dash over here, and they essentially adjust the regeneration of the car when you get off the throttle. You can set it between 0 and 3. So you've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 0 being the least aggressive. In fact, there's no regeneration in 0. When you get off the gas, let me just put it into 0, regen off, you just coast, right? You get off the gas and you're just free flowing. There's absolutely no deceleration that takes place, except unless there's a gradient. So that is one way to drive this EV. Then you get into the regen settings. So you can go into 1, 2, and 3, and they progressively get more aggressive. 1 is the default setting, and 3 is the most aggressive setting. Which setting do I prefer it in? I found 2 to be a good sweet spot where you get a good amount of deceleration, but it's not too hard. 3 is fairly hard, so you may take a little bit of time to get used to that deceleration, but all 3 settings, I have to say, are very well tuned. You know, at no point did I find myself feeling uncomfortable. At no point did anything catch me out or by surprise. It works fairly well. It works seamlessly. And, well, you got to tune it depending on A, how you like to drive, or B, how anxious you are about your range. If you want a lot of regeneration, stick it into 3. No problems. It will store as much energy as it can back into the battery. Now let's talk about ride quality. And ride is genuinely impressive on the Tiago EV. Tata Motors generally always nails the ride and handling balance of its cars, and the Tiago EV definitely is one of its better riding cars. It feels very planted, very stable. There's a bit of weight, so it doesn't float around too much, and it just feels very tied down to the road. At the same time, it disguises its weight very well. So when you go through bumps, through potholes, it doesn't feel like it's heaving and lumbering under the weight of the batteries. It does feel like a regular car, and that's a good thing. It's supposed to feel as close to a regular car as possible. The Comfort levels are high. It deals with broken roads and potholes very well. I haven't had any problems with ground clearance. It hasn't scraped anywhere yet. So that's a good thing. It genuinely gives you a sense of confidence and stability behind the wheel. We've driven it in city roads, on narrow village roads, and now on the highway. And at all points of time, it just feels very stable and secure. On the handling front as well, it feels really impressive. And when you chuck it around a bend, it feels very composed. It feels very natural. One criticism, the tires, they squeal a lot and you do understeer fairly quickly. I think if you change the tires to slightly stickier ones, you will have better grip and better control when you're handling. But fundamentally, the chassis is sound. It feels well made. It feels composed and sorted. Now, charging times. On a regular wall box that comes with the car, this takes about 8.5 hours to charge up to full charge. You can get a faster wall box, a 7.2 kilowatt wall box. That reduces the time to about 3.5 hours. And it also accepts DC charging. So should you find a DC fast charger, plug it in, up to 50 kilowatts is what it accepts, and it'll go from 0 to 80% in an hour, which is fairly quick. So in terms of charging times, you've got a couple of options. It'll also plug into your regular wall socket, but then charging times obviously goes up. So what you want to do is get a regular wall box and then basis your usage. If you need that fast charger, get the fast charger. If you don't need it, if you're just going to be charging it overnight every night, you can get the regular wall box charger, save that money. Overall, I'm super impressed with the Tiago EV. I think it's the right package for an EV, the rightest one yet. And I'll tell you why. At this point of time, at least, going to be restricted to the city. And when you've got a small compact car like this, you've got the inherent advantages of a small footprint in the city. They're just easier to drive, easier to maneuver, easier to find parking, all of those things. And couple that to the advantages of the EV drivetrain. And what I like, what Tata Motors has done is they've not relegated the Tiago EV to a bare minimum in terms of spec, in terms of features. They've given you a little bit of luxury because I think they understand that the buyer for the Tiago EV, despite the fact that it sits at a lower price point, has high expectations. This may be their second car. They're used to a lot more luxury. They're used to a certain amount of creature comforts. And Tata Motors has delivered that in this car. So you get stuff like auto wipers, auto headlamps, TPMS, small things that makes a difference, that they uplift the driving experience just that little bit and make the ownership experience a lot more enjoyable. So when you sit in your Tiago EV, you don't feel like you're sitting in a cheap car. You feel like you're sitting in a car that's well thought out, and that makes a huge difference every time you climb into it. You need to remember that this is still a small car, so you do not have a lavish back seat. You have to make some compromises up front. Like a 1 liter bottle won't fit into the door pockets. You've got to fit smaller half-liter bottles. Small things like that just remind you that this is a compact car, which is okay. That is the fundamental part of the Tiago EV, right? And that's something you have to come to terms with off the get-go. With that aside, I'm really impressed with the Tiago EV. There's very little that I can fault about it. This is genuinely something that I'd want in my garage. Like if I was in the market for an electric car right now, this is probably what I would get. Okay, if I had to criticize a few things about the Tiago EV, one, I would say the feel on the brakes is not as nice as I would have liked. It feels a little disconnected from the brakes. So you do hit the brakes and it does slow down. Obviously, it's a combination of regeneration plus the actual brakes. But the sensations that you get from the pedal, they're not the most confidence inspiring. It just feels a little disconnected from the front end. The stopping power is fine, no complaints there. It stops very well, but the sensations is what I'm talking about. That is not as nice as I would have liked. Second, I'm not a big fan of this rotary gear selector. You have to really stand on the brake to get it to select. Sometimes if you're just feathering the brake and you try to switch, it does not select or does not change from reverse to neutral or from neutral to drive. So if you're in a hurry and you've just feathered the brake and tried to shift, nothing will happen and then you're left confused as to what's going on. You've got to step like firmly on the brake and then shift. And another criticism that I would have is the fact that it doesn't get a spare tire. I think that is something you need to be mindful of. I mean, you do get a puncture repair kit, but the lack of a spare, the lack of even a space saver is a bit of a problem. You could get stranded. I mean, if you cut your sidewall or something like that. I mean, these tires are generally more robust But should something happen of that kind, you will get stranded. But those are drawbacks. That's something that they've had to manage because of the packaging. You've got the batteries there where the spare wheel normally would be. So it's a compromise, it's a trade-off, and it's something you're going to have to live with. Introductory prices for the Tiago EV start at rupees 8.5 lakhs ex showroom. This particular top-end variant costs rupees 11.3 lakhs ex showroom. You can also get it with a faster 7.2 kilowatt charger for another 50,000 bucks over that ex showroom price. That makes this Tiago EV, I think, a great value proposition. It's got so much going for it. It's got good performance, it's got great ride quality, it's got good handling, it's a fairly loaded, comfortable interior, and it's got more than enough range. For an urban city car, it gets so much right. And EVs, they're best driven in the city. If you're somebody who's been on the fence about an electric car for a while now, I have a feeling this is going to change your mind. Go out, drive one, and when you book it, you better be prepared to wait, because there are a lot of people who are going to be putting down their money for the Tiago EV.